So just set some expectations here. My slides are available at the first link here. There's a reference to the starter project URL in the slides as well. We're going to be doing coding along the way here, and unlike the last session that I think was in here, my intention is not to talk a little bit and then set you loose on an exercise. I'm going to be coding along with you guys. So if you have the slides, it might be a little bit easier for you to have a close view of the code that we're going to be writing. My intent is for you to write it along with me, but if you just want to cut and paste it out of the slides, I mean, that's your choice. I always feel that I learn better by doing. So one caution, if you do copy and paste out of the slides, I noticed on my own when I was just doing some trial runs that some of the single apostrophes or the quotes in the slides are a little wonky. So if you copy and paste into the code and you get a string error of some sort, you might need to replace those single quotes within the code. I have some checkpoint repositories along the way. So once we're done with a certain section of code, if you get lost or you're having errors, you can always reference that checkpoint repository to have a starting point midway through the process. We're going to be doing some debug later on using the Redux DevTools extension in Chrome. So if you don't have that already, you might want to get that installed quick if you want to follow along. You'll be able to see what I'm doing either way, so up to you if you want to take that extra step. We're a big group, obviously, so I'm not going to plan to take questions along the way, but we have Jorge over here, so if you're having any trouble along the way and you have a question, he's familiar with ngRx, so he can probably help you out. So to get started with some introductions here, my name is Aspen Payton, as I was introduced. My background long-term has not been in Angular. I actually worked for 19 years at IBM doing back-end development for the last several years, all in Java. And then I decided I was done with that and I wanted a big change. So I moved less than 18 months ago to the Mayo Clinic and started learning Angular there with the team that I picked up work with. We were all kind of on the same track and got introduced to ngRx there. So just to set some expectations for this presentation, because I've been chatting with people since I've been here, and they're like, oh, I'm going to go to your presentation because I want to learn about advanced ways to extend the pattern or to introduce debug within my ngRx application. This is not the session for you if that's what you're looking for. This is a very basic introduction to ngRx. So if you're already familiar with the pattern and you want to go beyond that, there's an advanced course I heard in one of the other ballrooms on RxJS during this time. If you are looking for an entry-level understanding of ngRx and you want to take a step back, look at the overall pattern and how to implement it in an application, this is where you want to be. I'll also note that just listening to some of the pitches yesterday has taught me that I'm nowhere near the expert on ngRx, and I have some takeaways that I'm going to be looking into when I leave here just to advance my own knowledge of the pattern. There's just a lot of new functionality to incorporate, and this whole community moves so quickly. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey and how I ended up here. I mentioned that I'm at Mayo, and while I was there and starting to learn Angular, I had a coworker tell me, hey, you should really be using ngRx. It's a cool way to manage your state. And I thought, I don't really know why I need that. I kind of had a misunderstanding that maybe it was related to routing in my application. It was just totally over my head. I wasn't getting it all. And this was in February of last year. So the aha moment that I had was when I was working in a sandbox application, and we were just, kind of trying to get a starter project going, and we had a couple of sources of input. We could be pulling patient data from the enterprise level, or we could pull patient data from our registry store. It was just a local server that we had set up with our team. And so I had to set up, and you could choose which source of data you wanted, and whatever source you picked, we would draw in a list of patients and populate it on the screen. And then you could click on a patient, and we would bring up all the details of that patient, so you could enrich some data related to that. But as soon as you clicked on a patient in the list, and it went and loaded a new page with details for that patient, I lost the knowledge of what my data source was, because that knowledge was in the last page. And so then I started thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like start passing data between my pages. And that's when I had this aha moment. That's why I wanted ngRx, because if I could just store that knowledge of what my data source was in my state, then any component in my application would have access to that knowledge, and then I wouldn't deal with having to pass data all over my application. So once I had that moment of realization that I wanted to learn ngRx, I embarked on a mission to find education about it. And it was really easy to find education sessions that just talked about the general pattern and the high-level concepts of ngRx, but I really struggled to find a basic application that would help me understand how to take that pattern and translate it into code. I found myself just taking other people's code and trying to pick it apart and understand the process, and it was not an easy task. And a lot of the examples that were out there were very tailored to a specific industry. It might have been financial related or manufacturing or something like that. So I was having a hard time wrapping my brain around the whole thing. So initially, one of my coworkers stumbled upon an article that used an analogy that related the ngRx pattern to an apple. And it said, here's some actions you can do with your apple. You can wash your apple and take a bite of your apple. And I thought, I love that analogy. I mean, anybody can relate to the analogy of an apple. It's not industry specific. So I said, I'm going to write that program. I'm going to write a program about fruit, and then I'm going to teach the rest of my team how ngRx works based on fruit. And from that, I went to a local conference and just talked about the work that we were doing at Mayo. It was not this workshop at the time, but they told me about this conference. And I thought, hey, if my team learned about ngRx from fruit, maybe other people might want to learn about ngRx from fruit. So I threw it out there, and here I am. So why do you want to learn ngRx? In our case, the V1 version of our application, it was written before I even came into Mayo. We were passing data up and down through different layers of controllers, and it was very difficult to track who was changing the information. It was hard to debug, and one of my coworkers just called it spaghetti code. So one of the reasons we were trying to implement ngRx in our newer version was to avoid this spaghetti code, because ngRx gives you a single source of truth for your entire application. Anything that you want to communicate between your components, you can put it in the store, and then if that store gets updated, all of your components who are subscribed to it have immediate feedback that that information has changed. Using the pattern also gives you consistent behavior through your application, because any component that is updating your state is following the same rules for making those updates. So it's very easy to track changes that happen within your code. There's also some great perks for testing, and I mentioned the Redux dev tools up front, and we'll look into that a little bit more later on in the session. And another useful thing about ngRx is that it's basically the Redux pattern. The pattern that ngRx implements is called Redux, and it's applicable across frameworks. So the Redux pattern is also implemented in React. It's implemented in Vue, it's implemented in Ember. So once you understand the fundamentals of that pattern, you can take that knowledge across platforms. However, it might not be for everyone. If you have a very simple application, a single-page application, and you have no need to pass data around and have this single source of truth between your components, then you might not need the overhead, because it does add a layer of complexity to your application to implement this framework. So we're going to start with the very most basic pattern you can get in ngRx. I already told you that we're going to have a single source of truth for our application, and that's going to be our data store. That's where anything that we want to communicate between our components will be located. And then we're going to define a set of actions that will be the things that we can do with our state, the ways that we might want to change it. However, actions are not actually going to update the state or change it. That is going to be done through reducers. Reducers are the only entities within this function that will update your state. And reducers are pure functions, so given the same set of input values, they'll always have the same set of output values. There's not going to be any additional logic within your reducers. If you need some more complexity, we'll get to that in like the third pass through this pattern a little later on. One other thing you should know is that the state in this pattern is immutable, so you're not going to just update it in place. The reducer will always create a new copy of the state, make any changes that are necessary, and overwrite the state within your data store. And having this immutable state and having this history of changes to that state gives you some benefits when it comes to debug, because you have that history of changes in a very clear and concise way. So that'll, again, come up later in this talk. So I gave you up front these links. These are the same links you had. I just want to reiterate for people that might have come in late or not gotten to them quickly enough. The first link is the slides, if you haven't gotten to them already. The second link is our starter application. So everybody should go to this link and fork the repository if you're planning to code along here. We are going to have in this StackBlitz repository, it's a skeleton code structure. The HTML is already written, and we're not doing anything with HTML here. This is not the point of our conversation today. We're focusing solely on the Redux code implementation. And then, again, the Redux DevTools extension to your Chrome. If you don't have it already and you want to get it going, it's a pretty quick install. So do you guys have? Yeah, absolutely. Let me get back for you. I'll give you a second to get here to our starting point. If the StackBlitz URL is too long, it's also embedded in the short slide URL. Okay, are we generally okay? All caught up? Okay. So I'm going to be flipping back and forth the screen up here between my slides and StackBlitz so I can code along with you guys. But my general format is we're going to look at the slide and talk about what we're going to do, flip over StackBlitz and code it, and then we'll come back and just checkpoint where we're at before we move on. I ran into some issues when I was doing this trial runs where I would flip over to StackBlitz and lose my mouse. And I had to kind of jump out of slideshow mode, so hopefully it's not going to happen, but I might have to jump through a few hoops along the way if that's the case. But we'll get there in the end. Okay, so starting out, our first step here is going to be to define the state of our banana, because we're creating a banana application. It's not the Apple app that I initially saw, but I just like the actions you can do with a banana better than an apple, so that's where I went with this. You'll see throughout the pattern here, I've kept the simple pattern that we just talked about in the upper right corner of the screen, and the little yellow highlighting is going to show you where we're at in the pattern for any piece of code that we're implementing. So we're starting out on the store because we're going to define the state of our banana. And the things we want to know about our banana are, is it peeled? How many bites are left of our banana? And what color is it? Because the color is going to tell us if it's a fresh banana or an old banana. And then also we need to find just a general initial state of our banana. Here we're just going to leave an empty state because we're going to define that initial state of a fresh banana ourselves. So I'm going to flip over, well, I'm going to try to flip over to StackBlitz. And we'll get started. So the first thing we need to do in our banana directory that already exists is we're going to create a new folder called state, because that's where we're going to store all the information about the state of our banana. And within that folder, we want to create a file, and we're going to call it banana.state.ts. When we get to the coding sections here, and there's actually code being written, I'm going to try to not talk while I'm coding, because I'm going to assume that you're coding too, and you're not going to hear what I'm saying while we're all coding. I tend to talk to myself though, so I'm gonna make an effort. So we'll get going here on our first piece of code. Oh, except that I'm not typing. We changed the size of the font on here, so hopefully it's big enough for you guys to see. Okay, so I've got my initial state typed out here, so I'm going to flip back while the rest of you are finishing up and just reiterate. We've defined this state file. It contains the things that we want to know about our banana, the things that we want to track within our application. Oh, flipped 2 slides. So the next thing we need to know is, what are the things we can do with our banana? And we're not going to do all of our actions up front. We're going to follow this pattern through in a few iterations so you guys can get a consistent feel. It seems like yesterday when I was sitting through these 20 and 5-minute sessions, it was like a lot of information coming at me all at once, and I had to just take some notes for things I wanted to follow up on. And I'm trying to do the opposite of that today. We're going to take this slow and reinforce the ideas so that they'll make sense, and you'll be able to take away this knowledge of how to implement this pattern. So the first action we're going to define about our banana is how to get a new one. Actions within the Redux pattern all follow the same pattern, and they're very slim pieces of code. They're all going to have a type that says what type of action you're going to take, and they all have a payload. And coming into this first one, we're not going to worry about that payload. We're just going to pass nothing into our action. So we're just going to define that payload within our action as an any. So flipping back over to our stack blitz, and my command tab does not like to work well on this computer. So we're going to create a new file, again, within our state directory, because this is part of how we're tracking the state of our banana. And this one we're going to call banana.actions.ts. So while you guys are wrapping up, just to reiterate, we've created an action here to get a new banana. We've defined the type as getNewBanana, and our constructor simply has a console message in it, so we can pop up the console in our browser just to kind of see what's going on. It's an easy way to see what our app is doing as we progress. I'm just kind of listening for typing to see how many people are done. So we talked early on about the fact that our action is not going to actually update our state. Our action tells us what we're going to do, what kind of action we want to take to affect our state, but the only entity within the pattern that's actually going to make a change to our store is the reducer. So the next thing we need to do is create our reducer file, and it is going to handle our action that we just created of getNewBanana. So the essential structure of a reducer is that it's going to be a switch statement, and it's going to switch on the action that it's listening for. So for this first action, we want to have a case statement within our switch to handle the getNewBanana action. And we're also, at the bottom here, going to create the default, which will just return the current state. So for our get new banana case, we don't have a banana defined yet, so all we're going to do is set all of the properties of our banana to what we would want our new banana to be. In the default case here, you can see we're using the spread operator, and we're just saying, get a copy of whatever current state was passed in and return the same thing back. And we'll use that spread operator to create new copies of our state in future actions that we would then want to change a little bit. So let's hop over and get going on our reducer. This file is going to be banana.reducer.ts, and it's also going to be created in that same state directory that we just created. Okay, thank you. So it's telling me here that it doesn't like my banana actions file, but I've seen a few cases in StackBlitz where it says it doesn't like my file, but my file is there and it'll recognize it. So we're just going to move past this, and hopefully it'll resolve, and we'll deal with that when we come to it if it's still a problem. So we're going to flip back over to our slides here quick and just recap one more time while everybody's finishing up. So we've created our reducer file. We're switching on the type of action. The one action that we have at this point is getting a new banana, so we have a case statement in place to handle getting a new banana. We've set all the properties of our banana within that case statement, and then we also added a default case that will just return whatever the current state is. So before we move on to the next chunk of code, I'm going to divert for just a moment. So in this world, we're creating an app where we're only talking about bananas. But in a real application, you're probably going to have more components than just one about bananas. So if we were creating this in a larger world of fruit, we might have a banana component and an apple component and a watermelon component. And those components might also have slightly different properties defined within their state. So we need to bring all of that knowledge up to the app level of our application so that all of our components can have access to it. And the way our components are going to access that information from the app level is through selectors. So in this example, if we had a banana, an apple, and a watermelon, and we brought them all together into our application level state, and then we would create selectors that would allow our components to access those separate slices of state, then anytime it changed, every component that's subscribed to it will know about that change. So our banana component might only care about the banana slice of state, and our apple component might only care about our apple slice of state. But we might have a fruit salad component, and that component wants to know about all the slices of state. So you're going to see when we get a little further how we get access to those slices of state. And we're only going to deal with bananas in this case, but I wanted to take a step back and explain how multiple components within your application might want to have access to particular pieces of data so that they can all be updated whenever a change occurs. So with that knowledge that we need to bring the information about our banana state up to the application level, that's what we're going to do next. We're going to wire this infrastructure that we've just built into the application. So the first thing we need to do is export this information using an index file from our banana state folder. So we'll flip back over to our StackBlitz, and we're going to create within our state directory a new index.ts folder from which we're going to deal with these exports. So from this index file, we're going to export the knowledge of our reducer, the knowledge about our actions, and the knowledge about our initial banana state, and the overall state, all of those properties that we defined within our banana. So the next step of wiring this all in is that we need to create the actual app level state. So we're going to create a file called app.state.ts, and we're going to bring in that information about the banana that defines our banana slice of state. So you can see here we have an app level state defined, we have an app level initial state defined, and we have app level list of reducers. So if we were to create a banana component within this world, we would also bring in our banana information here. So our banana slice of state would come into the app state object. We'd have that initial apple state brought into the initial state at the app level, and we'd have the app level reducer also brought in here. So we'll flip over, and this file is going to be created at in the app directory in StackBlitz. So you want to find the app folder here, and we're going to create this file right here. So we just went through this process of trying to bring our banana slice of state up to the app level. We brought in the information about our banana state, our initial state, and our reducer. And this line at the very, oh my gosh, my code is cut off. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, now you can see the line at the bottom. That is our selector. And the selector is the thing that our component can access to say, I want to know what's going on with the banana slice of state. That's how we're going to return all of the properties of our banana to our component. So there's one more step of wiring that we have to take care of, and this is to get some additional information into our app module. We need to bring in a few modules from the libraries, and we need to add a couple of lines to our ng module import list. So whenever you see this kind of white dashed line, I'm just trying to indicate that these two chunks of code are not consecutive within the application or within the part we're working on. So when we go into the app module.ts file, the top part is going to go up with your import stuff, and then this bottom section is going to go into your ng module imports list. So switching to our app module. So we've got our initial imports up at the top here, and then like I mentioned, we're going to jump down into our ng module imports list for this bottom section. So a couple of these lines that we're referencing here, the ones I have called out that reference the store DevTools module, we're working those in here just because it's easier to do it while we're updating the app module. The benefit of that is actually with the Redux DevTools that we'll talk to later. So we'll revisit those two lines a little bit later when we start talking about debug. So now we've brought the knowledge of the state of our banana up to the app level, and we've done all of this wiring that we need to add. So now we can actually go to our component and try to exploit all this infrastructure that we just spent time adding. So we're going to go into our banana component, which is already existing in your skeleton project, and we're going to add some imports that we need to get access to this information. We're going to create a banana $sign variable, which is representative that it's an observable. And when we flip back over to Staplets, I'm going to pop into the HTML for just a minute so you can see where we tie that in. We're not doing any changes to the HTML, but it helps to know how this variable within our component is tied into the HTML that we're going to see when we get all of this wired up. So our constructor within our app component just needs to bring in the store, and then within our ng-init, we're going to request a new banana, and that new banana function within here is just going to dispatch the action we created to get a new banana. And then the ng-init is also going to set up that link between our banana observable and the selector that we created to get our banana slice of state from our store. So switching to our banana component type in place, so we're just going to add the code as needed within those functions. So once you've got your imports up at the top, we're going to go down right above our constructor to create this banana observable variable. Then we're going to define the values that are coming into our constructor. Then we'll just add this additional functionality.
Save all again.
We're just addressing the joys of live coding up here, so give me a second. Thank you. I swear yesterday I went through and I actually literally copied and pasted all of my code out of my slides into my app and it worked fine. So this has been quite an adventure. So I'm still getting an error here. I'm going to dispatch the action and it may magically just work because sometimes these errors in stack blitz just resolve. So for 1 second, let's take a step outside and look at this HTML like I mentioned we were going to up front. This line right here is the magic that is gluing our banana observable that we created using the async pipe to our store. So back in the banana component, we're accessing this selector and we're assigning it to our banana observable so that anytime we update the state, this line will be executed and then our HTML will have knowledge of that new banana state. So the next thing we need to do is actually dispatch our action. And once we dispatch the action, if all of these dependencies resolve, it'll automatically update in our HTML view off on the right here. And it's not working. Here?
Oh, okay, yeah. 2 points here is actions, 2 points.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I need to go back here. Give me 1 second. After action, got it.
And the saying it's out. It's the return only.
Yep. Maybe. Yeah, we're still not, there's still something going on here though. We're not calling our reducer. Yes. Yeah, that's what I had initially here, was just from state. You're saying like this. But not the, yeah. Which is what I had, and then I had an error, and then it... Okay. So I'm exposing myself as not a complete expert in this stuff, but it's part of our process. And one of the takeaways I want to give to you all is that if you find a useful methodology of communicating stuff, obviously I'm not doing the best job at that right now, but if you find a good example and a way to communicate this stuff to people, just put it out there, because you don't always have to be the primary expert on a topic to provide value to the community. So, after that painful process, we finally have a new banana here. And you can see down at the bottom just some text visualization of what our state looks like. So our initial state was that our banana is not peeled, so we have is peeled is false, and our bytes remaining is 9, and our color of our banana is yellow because we have a fresh banana right now. Let me get back to where I need to be in my own slides here. So I'm going to flip back to my slides. So we're at our checkpoint, finally. And if you got as lost as I did during that, you can always refer to this checkpoint repository, and it should get you to a working version of the place that we're at right now. So what we did through this whole process was we created the definition of our banana within our store. We defined our first action, which was to get a new banana. And then we created a reducer that has a switch statement with a case in there that would handle our get new banana action. We created at the app level, we brought all of that wiring up, and we created a selector called get my banana so that our component could access it. And then we finally dispatched that action within our component to get our initial state updated. And because we had that banana observable connected with the async pipe to our HTML immediately had the knowledge that we had gotten a new banana. I've added this first link in here to the slides for anybody who missed it early or comes in late, so that'll be repeated through all the checkpoints just in case someone needs it. So what you're probably thinking right now is, that was really painful, and we only got one action running. Do I have to do that every time? I have to add an action to my application? And thankfully, the answer is no. Once you have this initial infrastructure in place, it's pretty easy to add additional actions to your application. And so we're going to try that next. We're going to just add one more simple action to our application. So the next thing that we want to do with our banana is peel it. So in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is go into our actions.ts file, and we're going to add the peel banana action. And I'm all for code reuse, so really you can just copy and paste the existing action to get a new banana and change the name of it up a little bit, and we'll be good to go. So we're going to jump back over to our stack blitz, go back to our banana actions file. We need to create, we're going to copy this first line here where we defined our get new banana action and just tweak it for peeling a banana. Then I'm going to copy and paste the whole action that we created and tweak that as well. And then finally, down in the export statement, we just want to add our peel banana action to this union. So we've added this additional action, but again, our action isn't the part of our pattern here that updates our state. So we need to give our reducer knowledge about our new peel banana action. So now we're jumping into the reducer section of our pattern. We're going to add the import to peel to our peel banana action, and then we're just going to add a new case statement to that overall switch that's going to handle our peel banana action. And in this case, within our return, because we're not creating a banana from scratch, we're going to use that spread operator to create a new copy of our state, and then we're just going to change the isPeeled property on that state. So now that our reducer knows how to handle the peel banana action, the last thing we need to do to get this working is dispatch the new action from our component. So we need to import our peel banana action within our component, and then we need to dispatch it within the peel banana function. And this peel banana function is already connected to our peel banana button that's in our HTML. So as soon as we dispatch this action, then we can try out our peel banana button and see if we can get our banana peeled. So we've got peel banana added to our imports. And then you can scroll down and find the existing peel banana function and just add the dispatch to it. And we're still not dealing with payloads yet, so we're just going to pass null into our peel banana function. So now, within your little preview window, if you click peel banana, voila, we get a peeled banana. You can see that the state has updated down on the bottom to peel banana true. And if you're looking at your console, because we've been adding some little console log messages, you can see that we've triggered an action to get a new banana, which triggered the reducer then to get a new banana. Then by clicking the button, we triggered the action to peel our banana, which in turn triggered the reducer to actually update our state. I can. So your new banana action should follow exactly the same pattern as your get new banana action. We just want to change those references from get new to peel. So we're already at another checkpoint. That first action took a whole lot of work because we were building in all of this infrastructure. But once we have that in place, it's really simple to create a new action. It just took a few steps, adding a few lines of code to our actions file, a new case statement within our reducer, and we get to dispatch the action and we're off. So again, if you need to pick up at a checkpoint, I've got the checkpoint URL listed here for StackBlitz if you need to pick up that new repository. So the next phase of this pattern would be a slightly more complex action, because often you're going to need to pass some kind of information to your action in order to figure out how you want your state to change. For example, if you're dealing with products or patients, you might have some kind of ID that you need to pass to your action in order to get your processing done. So this kind of action with a payload follows exactly the same pattern that we've done so far. We just need to pass a payload in when we dispatch our action from the component, and then we need to handle that payload within the reducer. So we're going to do the same thing one more time, but this time we're going to add a payload to the mix. And this should be just about as quick as the last phase that we went through. So our next thing that we're going to do with our banana now that we peeled it is we want to eat it. And the payload that we're going to pass into our eat banana action will be the number of bites we want to take. Now I should point out that I set my bites remaining to my new banana to 9. And if you did not set your bites remaining to 9, your behavior might be slightly different than mine because the HTML works, but this is a workshop, so I didn't create it to be the most robust HTML in the world. So my assumption would be that you set the first baseline point of bites remaining in your banana to 9, and then every time we eat our banana, we're going to take 3 bites of it. If you want to play around with it later on your own, you are more than welcome to do so. So we're going to now jump back to our actions file, and we're going to add a new action to eat our banana. Again, we can do a lot of cutting and pasting because our actions always follow the same format. So we need to initially add our import. Our constant. We need to define our eat banana action. Then we can copy and paste an existing action and change the name of it. The one thing we're going to do slightly differently on this action is, for our payload, we're going to say number instead of any, because we want to make sure that when we dispatch this action, somebody's giving us a number so we know how many bites of our banana have been eaten. And then again, you need to add it to your export down at the bottom. And just like with all of our other actions, we now will have knowledge of the number of bytes eaten passed into our action, but our action itself isn't what updates our state. So we need to handle this payload within our reducer. So it's going to still follow the same pattern as our reducer in the past. We're going to bring in that import, and then we need to add a case statement within our switch. But when we update the state this time, we're going to take the bytes remaining in the existing state, and we're going to modify it to reduce it by the action payload that is passed in. So let me resize this a little. Oh, I lost my variable on the wrong field, wrong line, sorry. So again, within our reducer, we're importing our new eat banana action so our reducer can listen for it. And then in our case statement where we're going to handle that eat banana action, we're going to again use that spread operator because we need to create a new copy of our state. And then we're going to update the bytes remaining with the bytes remaining from the state minus the payload that was passed in on the action. So the last thing we need to do, just like when we added our peel banana action, we need to dispatch this action from our component. So we're going to import our eat banana action, and then within the existing eat banana function, we're going to dispatch the action. And we're going to pass in that we're going to take 3 bytes of our banana as the payload. And similar to our other functions, our eat banana function is also connected to our eat banana button on our UI. And right here is where you're going to specify that number of bytes that will be passed in as the payload. So now that we have this all wired up, we can peel our banana, and you can see the state update, and then we can eat our banana, and you can see our bytes remaining has been reduced to 6, and if we continue to eat our banana a couple of times, we can reduce it all the way down to 0. And you can see, if you're following along in the console log, you can see all of these actions occurring and being passed to the reducer. So we've been through this repetition a few times now. So you should have this general idea down that we've created this store of information, we've defined what the state of our banana is, we've created a few actions that will trigger changes to that state. Our reducer we created to listen for our different actions and update our state accordingly based on what we've requested it to do. And again, there's a checkpoint repository available here if you need to pick it up. So the next pass that we're going to do through this, we're going to add some additional complexity. We're going to mix it up a little bit. So far, this is the pattern we've been looking at. But I've added a question in here, and that is, do we need to handle an effect when we dispatch the action from our component? An effect is if we need something additional done other than just passing the action through reducer and having it update. This would be in cases where you need to make an HTTP call to bring in some additional data into your application, which is very common. There's not many chances, honestly, where you're going to have an action that doesn't need some side effect going on. So this is what the more extended pattern will look like. If you need to do something like make an HTTP call, then you need to add an effect into the pattern. When you add an effect into the pattern, you need to have two actions involved. The first action is, oh, can you hear me? Oh, that was weird, it just blipped out for me for a second. So I was saying, when you introduce an effect, you need two actions. Hello? Just when I get going, it cuts out on me. You need two actions to handle this effect. You need the initial action, which is going to initiate the process. It will call into the effect. The effect will do whatever magic you want, call off to whatever services you want to involve. And then when the effect is done, it's going to map to the completion action. The completion action will take any necessary information that was gathered from the service and pass it into the reducer to then update the state. So for this next pass through, I'm going to keep having that little mini diagram up in the upper right corner so you guys kind of know where we're at in the process, but it's going to look like this from now on. We're taking out the leg where it's an action that doesn't need an effect, and we're only going to look at the action that does need an effect. So the thing that we're going to add in our banana world is a service that's going to jump forward in time and cause our banana to rot. So what we're going to do is create a couple of new actions. The first one is going to initiate the time hop, and the second action will be to complete the time hop. We're going to initially create these two actions, then we're going to create the effect that's kind of the middle of that sandwich between them. That effect is going to call off to a very simple service that we'll write, and all the service is going to do is wait for a few seconds and then return the color of our rotted banana, which will be brown. So we'll first get started on these actions. And these actions are no different than the actions we've created so far. So really you can just copy and paste again, and we're going to update them a little bit to be our initiate time hop action and our time hop complete action. So again, this will be back in our banana actions file. So while you guys are finishing up, we'll just jump back to the pattern here. Again, our focus is on these initiation and completion actions within the pattern. And we've added to our code the constants that define our new actions, the code that is going to define what we need to do, the type and the payload of our actions, and then we added them to our union statement down at the bottom. So before we actually get to our effect, we're going to create this little service that's going to do our timeout and then return the new color of our banana. So we're going to call this service a rot service. And we'll jump over to StackBlitz, and we're going to define this service at the app level of our structure. So up at your app folder, just create a new file, and we're going to call it rot.service.ts. Yes. Okay, maybe some fresh batteries will keep me from blipping out on you guys. So I've got my service created. I'll give you guys just a minute to catch up if you need a little more time. I'm going to flip back over to my slide and just talk a little bit about what we're doing here. So we imported just a couple of modules that we needed for injectable and observables. I have an injectable decorator on here simply because it saves us the time of having to define this provider at our app module level. This little rot banana service, all it's doing is creating an observable and setting a timer, and when our 10 seconds is up, it's going to stick the word brown into our observable and send it back. And that's all we need it to do. So then we'll complete our observable at that time. So now that we have our service created, we're going to jump in and create a new effects file. And that's going to be the thing that listens for the initiate time hop function, calls off to the service. It'll wait a few seconds for the service to complete and return the new color of our banana. And then it's going to take that new color, the color brown, and it's going to pass it into our time hop complete action and dispatch that. And then our reducer will be listening for the time hop complete action, and it will update our store with our new state. So jumping into our effects, looks like we can see everything here. So we've got several imports that we're going to need to deal with, but the overall number of lines in our effect is going to be pretty small. Like I said, we're going to, the of type line right here, if I can get my mouse to show up, is the line that's going to say we're listening for our initiate time hop action. When we catch it, we're going to call our rot banana service here, and we're going to be switching our initiate time hop action to a time hop complete action, passing in this color as our payload. So let's flip over and get this coded up in our project. We are going to need a new file for this one, so within our state directory, we're going to create a new file for our banana effects. We'll just call it banana.effects.ts. You can see my effects is complaining a little bit about a couple of my imports, but we're going to cross our fingers and hope it's the same as the other file which was complaining about my imports. So I'm going to flip back to the same code in my slides for just a second. So to recap, our effect is listening for our initiation action. It's going to call off to our service. The service is going to wait a few seconds and pass a value back to our effect. And then our effect is taking that value sent back from the service, and it's going to send it into our completion action. So on both sides of this, our component is the part that needs to trigger to dispatch or initiate action, but our reducer in this case is going to be listening for our completion action. So now that we have both of our actions, our service and our effect all ready to go, we need to go into our reducer and add a new case statement to handle, oh, sorry, I was ahead on one laptop and not the other one. So we need to go into our reducer and add a new case statement that's going to listen for that time hop complete action. So it's the same pattern as we saw with our eat banana, because we're going to deal with a payload that we're going to assign to our color property within our banana state. And then we need to import our time hop complete action up in our imports. So hopping over, we're just going to go into our reducer file, get that completion action imported. And then we'll add the new case statement. And we're going to keep our spread operator here that's grabbing our copy of our current state, and then we're updating the color property in this case to be the payload that was passed in our action. So now that our reducer is listening for that completion action, oh, let me flip back over to my slides. Now we've got our reducer listening for that completion action. So the next thing we need to do is actually not jump to our component quite yet, because we are now bringing in an effect into the picture, which means we've got a little bit more wiring that we need to add at the app level so that our application knows about our effects. So there's 3 different files we're going to change here. First, we're going to go into that index.ts file that's dealing with all of our exports related to our banana state, and we're going to export our new effects at that level. Then we're going to go into our application level state and bring in the effects related to our banana slice of state. And then we need to go into our app module and pull in a few more imports and modules at that level. This last line here is not an import, it's actually going to go within our ng module into our import section. So we'll tackle these one at a time. So first things first, we're going to go to our index.ts file and deal with this new export. And you can see I'm getting a request to install a new package over here. For some reason, it doesn't seem to know what package it wants, so maybe if I finish this line, it will. Or maybe it just doesn't need that import anymore. I've gotten that import request a few times, so if you're getting in your little preview window a request to install a new dependency, just go ahead and resolve that dependency. If you click on it, it should install it for you. If not, you're good to go. So we're exporting our banana effects from our index file. Next, we need to jump into our app.state.ts file. Remember, this is where we're collecting all of the information about our banana slice of state, and now we've added effects to our banana, so we need to have that knowledge here as well. What did I miss, Bo? Equals after here. Thank you. Love a helpful audience. Okay, so we've got our export up at the app level now that's bringing in our banana effects knowledge to our app level state. So next we're going to jump over to our app.module.ts and deal with these additional imports that we need to pull in. The first one, on my line 8, we've already got an import statement bringing in our initial state and our reducers, so we just need to add our effects to that line. And then we've got a few completely new imports to add. And then once you have those imports resolved, we want to jump down into our module imports list. And we're just going to add a line for our effects module. So again, we exported the knowledge of our banana effects from our index. We pulled that knowledge into our app level state, and then we did a little bit of wiring within our app module to get the knowledge of this new functionality. So we already went through the pattern and created our actions, we created our effect, we created our service, but the reducer was only listening for the completion action, and I mentioned that our component, in order to trigger this whole process, needs to dispatch the initiation action. So we're going to bring in our initiate time hop action into our component in the imports, and then there's an existing time hop function within your component, and we're going to dispatch our time hop action. So let's jump back over to our banana component and get this wired up. So our time hop function here is obviously connected to our time hop button. So let's try to go through our whole pattern here. We'll peel our banana. We can see that our state updated to indicate is peeled is true. And then we can eat our banana a few times until we don't have any bites left. And now we're going to try triggering this time hop function. And remember, it's going to wait a few seconds, and then it should update our state with the color brown. So I can see down in my console that my rot banana service was triggered. And voila, we can see that our rot service completed, and now the color of our banana has been updated to brown. And the magic of having our banana observable within our component tied directly to our HTML automatically will update that state of our banana as soon as the service has returned and our reducer went through and updated that color within our state. So we've finished our basic pattern at this point. We created a few actions. On our last pass through, we created an effect with a couple of actions to handle both the initiation and the completion. And we created a service to rot our banana. We went into our reducer and added to our switch statement the case to handle our completion action. And then we went into our component and triggered that initiation to start the whole cycle rolling. So this is our final checkpoint for coding within this workshop. We're going to take a step aside now and talk a little bit about the debug tools, the Redux dev tools that we can use to debug our application. So we're going to switch back to StackBlitz and look at these tools a little bit more closely. But in my opinion, this was one of the biggest advantages I saw of ngRx, because having this pattern of always updating with a new copy of your state gives you this history so that you can go into the dev tools and see exactly what has happened over time within your state. It's really easy to set up and use. If you've already installed in your browser, you can see how easy the setup was. And also, aside from just the debug tools, from a unit test perspective, you know what your state looks like. It's really just an object. And so you can feed pretty much anything into your state from a test perspective to try to trigger certain circumstances within your application. It makes for a really robust test framework. So I mentioned up front the Redux DevTools plugin for Chrome. And if you missed it up front, you can always pop out and install it quick now. And the other piece you need to enable this functionality is something we coded up pretty early in the workshop. It's these two lines here that bring in the DevTools functionality. And in the bottom section here, you'll see we have a max age configured of 25. And that's telling us that we want to maintain a history of 25 actions within our history. So if I don't need to know that much, I could say I only want to keep track of the last 5 actions. If I want a whole bunch of history because I'm having a problem, maybe I want to keep track of 100 actions. That's where you would update the size of your history here. So I'm going to flip over back to my StackBlitz quick. And if you can see this little tiny icon up here that's kind of teal colored, if I was on a web page where Redux was not enabled, this would be grayed out. But because I have Redux enabled, you can see that it's colored at this time. And so I can click on it. And it is not showing me the right thing right now. Let me get back out of here for a second and refresh. We're going to refresh this and then kind of flip through our actions really quick so we have a fresh history. Oh, you know what? I know what the problem is. So there's a little button up here that says open a new window. We're going to just take our application and open it in a separate window. Within the StackBlitz world, it kind of gets confused about whether it's tracking the history within StackBlitz versus the history within the app we're trying to test. So I'm going to open this in a new window, jump through our actions again quickly. I'm going to skip the time hop so we don't have to wait 10 seconds, and then open our debug tools. So you can see right here we have a list of actions. I would make this bigger for you if I could, but if I disconnect it from its current location, it flips back to StackBlitz tracking. So I'm kind of hamstrung in this regard. So hopefully you can see this okay, or you can look at it on your local laptop. So there's a nice little filtering function up here at the top. So if I, for example, only wanted to see my eat actions, I can just type that word in there and it'll filter my list down. If you're working in a much larger application, you might have a whole bunch of actions going on. So having that filtering capability can be really helpful. I can also, because I see the history here, I could go back to this get new banana action. I could say I want to jump to that point. You can see it update, and then I can hit play here, and it will start to flip through everything that's happened since that point within my application. Also off to the, we'll draw attention to the far side here. I'll just click P on my banana. You can see up in the corner here I have diff selected. So when I select an action within my list, it's going to show me what changed when that action occurred. So we're saying because I peeled my banana, at that time that action occurred, we changed the isPeeled property from false to true. And similarly, if I clicked eat banana, you can see we changed the bytes remaining property at that time from 9 to 6. There's a few different ways you can look at your state within the debug tools here. I can just flip to my state button, and instead of showing me the differences when a particular action occurred, it'll show me the entire contents of my state at the time that action occurred. I can look at it in a tree view. I can flip to chart and look at it in a chart view. Not super helpful when you're dealing with a super simple state, but in a much bigger state, this chart view can be helpful. And I can also look at just a raw JSON style structure. So you can see how having that ability within a larger framework, when you have multiple components that could be dispatching actions and multiple components listening for things, it can be hard to know up front which component was responsible for a change in your state. So having this history available within your debug tools can be a really powerful way for you to debug your application and figure out exactly where your banana turned purple instead of brown. So that's basically what the main content I wanted to cover with you guys today, and hopefully you found it helpful. I think there's a lot of confusion about the pattern in general, so sometimes we get thrown into the deep end and we're just trying to figure out, and it can take, if we take a step back, it can kind of help us understand the pattern in a little more depth. I have extended this pattern in my own work a little bit further than we covered today. For example, it involves a little bit more layer of complexity. If you're working with modules, you have to define your selector slightly differently, but there's a number of demos out there that can give you some guidance in that area. We found it helpful to also put a hook into our code that gets called at app initialization so that we can retrieve a configuration file that we need to know, like our user information who's using our UI. And if we put that hook in at app initialization, we can grab that config file and have it automatically loaded into our store up front. So we have it available from the moment an app is loaded. I also was able to integrate it a little bit with dynamic components. So we had a scenario where based on the field that a user clicked on the left side of the screen, we wanted to update a different or load a different component on the right side of the screen. So we might have had to visualize data from a document source or laboratory results. And so we had different components that we would need to load based on what kind of data the user wanted to look at. So by tying this into ngRx, we could take the knowledge of what the user clicked on one side of the screen, load it into the store, and then automatically tie into that store the knowledge of what kind of component we needed to load based on that. And if this is something that now you've understood the pattern that you would find useful to have examples of, my Twitter handle is on the last page that we'll get to in a second. And if you tweet me, I would be happy to go out and create additional GitHub repositories that show some examples in code that would extend the Banana app to these additional use cases if necessary. It was just beyond the scope of this workshop, so I didn't have time to get to it beforehand. Again, I'm reiterating that the presentation slides are available if you need to access them later. I have a link in here to an article called Just Explain Redux Like I'm 5, because this is where the Apple analogy came from that started me down this path of creating the Banana app. The third link here is a Narwhal blog post that somebody directed me to early on that has some visualization of more advanced patterns you can use with ngRx that I found really helpful. And I haven't had a need to implement them yet, but it goes through possibilities like you might have an action dispatch that you need to split into multiple actions to deal with asynchronous operations. And so it was a really solid way to get a visualization and flow charts of how you might want to tackle those things within Redux. And then finally, I have a link to general information about my employer. So here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm going to be in the speaker panel this afternoon in about a half hour. You could catch me there. Or if you just see me around and you want to chat, I'm always up to talk to people. And I'm here by myself, so I have nothing better to do than talk to strangers. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that you all found this useful. And I would like to reiterate that you don't always have to be the expert to provide value to the community. So I strongly encourage everybody to participate in the community overall. Everybody has been so welcoming, and I think everybody appreciates when we can share experiences that might benefit each other. Thank you very much.